Jerome Paquette was 8 years old when all of this happened. It has captivated him ever since. So much so that the Duluthian has spent the last 15 years off and on researching the case and hopes to write a book someday. Paquette says he hopes that book puts to rest some of the mystery surrounding this nearly half-century old story. The Glen Sheen murders, the 1918 fires, and the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Major headlines from the last century, but for Jerome Paquette, this headline is still being written.
This definitely is one that should not have been forgotten about.
About 40 years ago, Sally Theraldson and Virgil LaPanta disappeared. They were last seen at the Seaway Hotel shortly after 2 a.m.
The Glen Sheen murders are the most well-known murder in Duluth, but that has nothing on this story.
Paquette was 13 years old when images of this car drug up by a boat's anchor coming through the Duluth harbor made headlines.
Okay, it appears to be a maroon car.
Made their way onto the evening news.
It's much more than just a car driving off of a pier by a woman who drank too much.
Paquette's information comes from old police records and Jerry Fredrickson, one of the first responders on that August day.
They were speculating all day long about could they have been done in by Jerry Lee. You know, that was the speculation.
Jerry Lee was Sally's husband, so when Sally's body was found inside a car alongside LaPanta at the bottom of the bay, questions surfaced, like what was Sally doing with LaPanta when the vehicle careened over the docks and into the lake in the middle of the night.
If that was my mother, I would want to know. I would want to know what happened and why it happened. You know, I feel for her mother, I feel for Sally's mother and Sally's sister and her family, who never had answers.
To many, the resurfacing of the 1978 tornado marked the end of a tragic missing persons case. For Paquette, it was just the beginning of one of Duluth's greatest mysteries.
It doesn't make sense. None of it makes sense.
You see, when Sally and LaPanta went missing on August 29, 1978, it was just that, a missing persons case. 5 years later, to the day, the car was drug up and the secret the harbor had been keeping began to unravel.
The investigators went through quite a number of interviews and trying to get some information to either make or break a case, and I guess that never really truly happened.
Pouring through hundreds of pages of police documents has shown reasonable suspicion for Paquette, and interviews with those who knew Sally just muddy the waters.
None of them match up. None of them make a lot of sense. Nobody can explain why they were down there. You know, nobody can understand why a housewife with 5 children and grandchildren was out at 2:30 in the morning.
Paquette isn't alone. Interviews conducted by police seem to implicate Jerry Lee and his friend Bob Bowden. This letter, contained in the police file for the case, has no date, nor is it signed.
The 2 main suspects in this case are Mr. Theraldson and his drinking buddy, Robert Broden.
Police conducted more than 12.5 interviews over the course of the investigation. Contained in thousands of lines are what some might call coincidences, but what Paquette calls clues to what he thinks happened.
I wouldn't continue this if I thought that it was just a case of her driving over a pier.
Sally's acquaintances told police she was flashy with her appearance and never left home without lavish jewelry.
When they found the bodies, there was no jewelry on her, nowhere in the car, and the jewelry has never been discovered. From all appearances, what it looks like is that everything was removed prior to them being in the water.
And then there's the burning question. What was Sally doing with Virgil, a man who she hated, according to police interviews?
Her mother in Bemidji always said that Sally would never have gone down to that area of the port terminal area anytime because she was afraid of her own shadow.
No one really knows what the pair was doing together, only that police reports indicate Sally liked to purchase alcohol from Virgil and that she had tried to leave Jerry Lee but was too scared.
Doesn't add up. If she went to buy a bottle of liquor from Virgil at that time because she ran out at home, why didn't she just go back home right away?
Adding more mystery to the case, an 8-pound rock was found inside the car, which may not seem suspicious to some, but it was to police.
It could have easily been placed in there to hold down the accelerator. How it got there, what it was doing there, nobody knows.
An auto expert determined the car was in second gear when it plunged into the deep.
If she was speeding along, why was it in second?
When the car was pulled up, investigators say the bodies were relatively intact enough to rule out being shot or stabbed. but leaving open the idea that they could have been poisoned or simply drowned.
They were clearly identifiable. I knew both of them, and I immediately knew it was them.
That brings us back to Jerry Lee. Police considered him a person of interest, but why would he kill his own wife? That's a question Paquette has been asking for decades.
Everything was hushed, everything was rushed. Get done with it. It's not nice, it's not pretty, we don't want to talk about it.
Police documents obtained by KBJR in the 90s state Jerry Lee would have come into a large sum of insurance money upon the death of Sally.
His sister-in-law claimed that there was only a $1,000 insurance policy on his wife, but that wasn't true. He was also made a statement that he had a lot invested in Sally.
Moreover, those documents revealed a conversation with a superior masseuse where Jerry Lee allegedly said, quote, "Those two bodies will never be found because they're at the bottom of the bay."
There was speculation about foul play, but nobody knew for sure.
Jerry Lee died 5 years after the car was pulled from the bay, but not before police interviewed him about the deaths. However, Duluth police say records of Jerry Lee's interviews were destroyed in the 2012 flood. The case was closed shortly after Jerry Lee's death and ruled an accident. Nobody was charged with murder.
From what I know about it, they did everything imaginable to try to come up with evidence that would indicate it had been murder, and there was just nothing left to investigate.
As far as Bob Bowden, the other person of interest, in an interview with police in 1983, he maintained he had nothing to do with Sally and LaPanta's deaths. Even though he and Jerry were together for a portion of the night, he believed Jerry Lee had something to do with the death and used him as an alibi.
So if he had a secret, he took me to his grave.
Whether this was all the result of a tragic accident or murder, Paquette hopes his book will put the story to rest. Until then, the conclusion remains submerged in mystery. According to Bowden's interview with police in 1983, he and Jerry Lee never spoke to each other after 1978, not even after the car was drug up in the harbor.